Hi, I'm Rena, and this is the story of how a beat-up Honda Civic, a neighbor's quiet wisdom, and a broken silence showed me who I really was. Far from the shadows my family placed me in. They laughed when I brought dessert, called me useless when I tried to help, and looked away when I finally stood up. But sometimes the ones they underestimate are the ones quietly building something that will outlast all the noise. Before we go any further, tell me, have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? If yes, comment number 1. If no, comment number 0. This is a family drama you don't want to miss. They laughed when I offered to bring dessert. Then Vanessa called me useless, and Mom didn't say a word. I should have known it would be another one of those family dinners, where smiles are tight and jabs come sugar-coated. It was early December, the kind of chilly Friday where the wind slipped right under your coat collar and made your shoulders tense. Clifton, New Jersey had just gotten its first real snow, a thin crust of white that dusted sidewalks and made the trees look like they belonged on a Christmas card. Mom's house glowed dimly with half-hearted holiday cheer. Blinking icicle lights only stretched across half the porch, and the inflatable snowman leaned sideways, half deflated like it had given up. Inside, the smell of reheated turkey and overly sweet yams filled the air. Bing Crosby crooned softly from the old kitchen radio. White Christmas, of course. I held my glass baking dish tight as I stepped inside, smiling. I brought apple crisp, I said, unwrapping the foil carefully. Still warm. Vanessa was the first to look up, lounging on the sofa in a red sweater that probably cost more than my rent. Her nails sparkled as she swirled her wine glass. "How quaint," she said, giving me a once-over. I see the thrift coat made a comeback. I ignored it. I always did. Mom came out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a holiday-themed towel. "Oh, good," she said to no one in particular. "More dessert." Then she went right back in, not asking about the recipe or how I'd been. At dinner, Vanessa took over the room as always. She was talking about a new campaign, something with a luxury brand and a possible trip to Milan. "It's a full rollout," she explained, sipping her wine. "They wanted someone with vision." "That's amazing," one of the cousins chimed in. I waited for a lull in conversation before offering. "Actually, I wrote a piece recently on how small towns are reviving old-world craftsmanship. It got picked up by—" "Oh, you're still doing that blog?" Vanessa cut in. "I thought it was more of a hobby." "No, it's more than—" I started, but the moment had passed. No one looked up. The mashed potatoes were lukewarm. The green beans were limp. Around me, voices lifted in easy celebration. I watched Vanessa take center stage with every breath, and I wondered when I'd stopped being someone worth listening to. Vanessa turned her eyes on me, tilting her head. "Honestly, I don't even know what you do anymore." I swallowed. "I do a lot, actually." Mom let out a little laugh, not unkind, but dismissive. "Vanessa just means you're hard to keep up with, dear." I stood, brushing crumbs off my lap. "I think I'll head out. Long day." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Always running, Rena." I turned back and said quietly, "Better than standing still in someone else's shadow." Marla, still Mom, technically, lifted her wine glass. "Let's not ruin the evening." And then it happened. Clear, sharp, deliberate. "She's useless, Mom. Always has been." The room stilled. No one gasped. No one objected. One aunt shifted in her seat, embarrassed. A cousin focused hard on his cranberry sauce. But no one said a word in my defense. Not even Mom. I stood there, frozen. Not from the cold, but from the weight of silence. And still, I didn't cry. I walked out without a word. The snow had started falling again, softer this time. The porch light cast a gentle glow on the front steps as I descended slowly, each step quieter than the last. My breath fogged up the air, but my eyes didn't. I wasn't crying this time. The sky was gray the next morning, but the old man on the porch still tipped his hat at me. Even when family shrinks you, sometimes a stranger sees you clearer. I woke up to the scent of cold air and burnt cinnamon drifting in from across the street. The diner always overbaked their rolls, but somehow it was comforting, familiar. My garage unit was chilly, the kind of cold that settled into your joints and made even stepping onto the floor a small act of courage. I wrapped my hands around a mug of black coffee and stared at my laptop screen. The blog stats were flatlined again. 0 views overnight. No new comments. I clicked through a few tabs, then closed it. Outside, Clifton moved at its usual lazy pace. A delivery truck idled by the curb, and the same dog barked at the same squirrel under the same mailbox tree. I was pulling on my coat when I noticed him, Mr. Dorsey, my neighbor across the street, leaning stiffly over his mailbox. I'd seen him before. Quiet, older, always in the same gray cap and weathered cardigan. We'd nodded in passing, nothing more. But today, he looked like he was fighting the mailbox hinge more than just trying to get his letters. I crossed the street. "Mind if I take a look?" I asked. He hesitated, then stepped aside. "Be my guest, Miss Hollowell." No one called me that anymore. The hinge had rusted out on one side and was hanging by a single screw. I walked back to my garage, grabbed a wrench, a few spare washers, and 10 minutes later, the door swung open clean and smooth. "Well, I'll be," Mr. Dorsey said, testing it. "Just needed a little love," I replied, brushing off my hands. He tipped his hat again. "You've got a good eye. Not many folks take the time." We didn't say much more. He shuffled back inside with a nod, and I returned to the garage. There, half covered under a blue tarp, sat an old lawnmower I'd picked up for parts, but never got around to fixing. I sat beside it and started fiddling with the spark plug. Grease under my nails felt better than silence in my chest. My phone buzzed. A message from Tommy. "Hey, a client at the senior center asked about your blog. She's got a vintage sewing machine needing a fix. Want me to send her your info?" I smiled for the first time that morning. Tommy was the only person who consistently saw worth in what I did. Small repairs, restoring things others threw away. I texted him back, "Sure, tell her to email me." A while later, as I was sweeping the dust near the garage steps, I noticed something sitting on the welcome mat, a brown paper bag and a folded note. I picked it up. Inside, 2 cookies, oatmeal raisin, and a small handwritten card. "Thank you for fixing the hinge. Small things matter. Edie." I held the note for a long moment. The house across the street was quiet again, but I imagined Mr. Dorsey watching from behind those gauzy curtains, the way older folks often do when they've lived long enough to spot kindness. I stepped back into the garage and looked toward the back corner. The blue tarp still hung there, weighted down by time and apathy. I pulled it off. The old Honda Civic underneath was dusty and dented. One mirror hung loose, and the front bumper had a gash from who knows what winter. But as I looked at it, something flickered in me. A memory of Mom missing the bus again, of her shoulders hunched against the cold, her shoes soaked from slush. She never asked for help, but that didn't mean she didn't need it. I exhaled slowly, already running the checklist in my mind. Replace the battery, check the fluids, fix the door lock. She pulls off the tarp from the old car. It's dusty, dented, but something flickers in her eyes. Living in the same family with my mother and sister, I have been trying to do many things for them, but they have never recognized me. My sister looks down on me. My mother is silent. It is a feeling of collapse and really sad. Have you ever felt the same way as I do now? If you sympathize with me, please leave a comment number 9 in the comment section below. Now, let's get to the next development of this story. She never asked for help, but every time I saw her chasing a bus in the cold, something inside me tightened. It started last week, on a Wednesday morning. I just stepped out to grab coffee when I spotted Mom at the corner. Her coat flapped open in the wind, grocery bags tugging her arms down like weights. The number 17 bus came early, and I watched her run, really run, only to miss it by seconds. She stood there for a while, hunched, breath puffing out in short clouds. Vanessa had called me useless at dinner just days before. But there was Mom, still catching buses with aching knees, because no one in the family thought she needed or deserved better. That image clung to me like a draft under the door. That evening, I stopped by Lyle's Auto, a cramped repair shop tucked behind the Maple Diner, where I used to go with Dad on Saturdays before he passed. The place smelled like burnt oil and yesterday's coffee. Mr. Lyle, the owner, was hunched over a transmission, thick glasses sliding down his nose. "You looking for someone?" he asked without glancing up. I hesitated, fingers curling around the strap of my canvas bag. "Actually, I heard you sometimes have cars for scrap. I was wondering if any are, salvageable." He looked at me then. "You fix cars?" "Somewhat," I said. "I'm learning. I've fixed small engines, patched up scooters, repainted a few fenders. Nothing fancy." He gave a quiet grunt and motioned me to follow him out back. We squeezed between two rusted trucks and came upon a dusty blue 2003 Honda Civic. It had a cracked taillight and a dented bumper, but the frame looked solid. I pressed my palm to the hood. "It runs?" I asked. "Needs a jump and a new battery. Might cough back to life. You'd have to do some patching." "I can work with that." He crossed his arms. "Don't see many young folks fixing cars for their moms these days." I smiled. "Maybe that's why it matters." We settled on a price just under what I'd tucked away in my envelope marked emergencies. I didn't flinch. This felt like one. Tommy stopped by the next morning with some tools and a box of spark plugs. "You sure you want to do all this?" he asked. I was under the car, oil pan draining into an old cereal bowl. "Yeah, it's not for thanks. It's for something else." He nodded, didn't push. Each night after work, I came home, changed into thick socks and gloves, and started sanding. The rust came off slowly, revealing stubborn streaks of steel. I replaced the windshield wipers, patched a tear in the passenger seat, and installed new rubber floor mats I found on sale at the hardware store. The garage radio, dusty as it was, played soft jazz in the background, usually Ella Fitzgerald or Miles Davis, and I let the music carry me. I drank instant coffee from a chipped thermos and scribbled notes in my journal during breaks. One night, I wrote, "Maybe love isn't loud. Maybe it's 4 replaced spark plugs and a tank of gas." Mr. Lyle popped in sometimes, mostly with a raised eyebrow or a quiet, "You're doing fine." I appreciated the silence. It gave the work weight. The last thing I did was polish the hood. My arms ached, but the deep blue gleam came through beneath the grime. I stood there in the glow of a single hanging bulb, fingers trailing along the curves of metal. It wasn't showroom perfect, but it was dependable, steady, like the love I never quite knew how to give until now. I walked to my closet and pulled out a ribbon I'd saved from an old birthday bouquet. Faded red, a little frayed. I tied it to the rearview mirror and sat in the driver's seat. The garage smelled like metal and cold air, but somehow it felt warm. "You don't have to clap," I whispered, looking ahead. "I'll still show up." I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I just parked the old Honda outside and knocked. Mom always said she didn't want surprises, but maybe that's because she never expected one to be good. Snowflakes drifted gently down, landing on the hood of the Honda like soft applause. I'd driven it across town with both hands gripping the wheel, the heater coughing to life in brief spurts. The ribbon I'd tied to the rearview mirror had loosened, fluttering as I turned into her street. Marla's porch light glowed faintly under the falling snow. A string of white Christmas lights hung across the eaves, blinking out of rhythm. It looked like every other winter I could remember. Decorations halfway up, a wreath on the door slightly crooked, the scent of cinnamon candles just strong enough to carry through the walls. Familiar, but not quite warm. I stepped onto the porch and knocked once, then again. My breath fogged the air, but I could hear movement inside. Eventually, the door creaked open. "Rena?" Mom's eyes squinted like she'd seen a ghost. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," I said, lifting my chin slightly. "Can you come outside for a minute? I have something to show you." She hesitated, looked back into the house as if checking to make sure no one else was there, then slipped on a shawl and followed me down the porch steps. When she saw the car, her steps slowed. "It's for you," I said softly. "Remember you said it was getting harder to make your appointments with the buses running late? I figured you might need something more reliable." The old Honda gleamed under the soft light, its imperfections masked by care. I'd tucked a folded note into the glove box. A full tank of gas. Fresh floor mats. I didn't say all that aloud. Marla stared at the car like it had grown there. "You fixed this?" I nodded. "Took a few weeks. It's nothing fancy, but it runs. Safe, too." "That's sweet," she said after a pause. Her smile barely touched her mouth. "But, how safe is it? It's an old car. I don't know if I'd trust it on the freeway." I swallowed hard. "It's not for road trips. It's for here, the grocery store, church, the pharmacy." She nodded again, then reached out and patted my arm. Just once. No hug. "Thank you." Before I could answer, headlights cut across the driveway. A silver SUV rolled in, tires crunching softly over the snow. Vanessa stepped out, phone in one hand, her coat trimmed with faux fur and her boots spotless. "Oh," she said, looking between us. "What's going on?" "I brought Mom something," I replied, more to the air than to her. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "That's the car you fixed?" Mom chimed in. "Rena brought it over just now. She said it's running. Isn't that nice?" Vanessa tilted her head, inspecting the car like it was a science project. "It's quaint, I guess. Good effort." Something tugged at my chest, but I pushed it down. I turned toward the porch. I should get going. As I reached the bottom step, I turned back just once. "You never had to clap," I said, voice low but steady. "But you could have said thank you louder." Vanessa stepped forward, the edge in her voice unmistakable. "You think this makes you not useless?" Mom didn't speak. Again. I smiled without warmth. "Number I fixed this for you, even knowing you wouldn't clap." I walked into the street, past the crunch of snow and the chill that suddenly didn't feel so cold anymore. As Rena walks away, Mr. Dorsey pulls up beside her on foot. "You done with that car?" he asks gently. Mr. Dorsey handed me an envelope and said, "Time to stop letting folks rent space in your head for free." Turns out, kindness, when quiet, still echoes loud in the right ears. The envelope was thick, its flap sealed with care. Mr. Dorsey stood beside my porch steps, his hat in one hand and a glint in his eye, like he knew something I didn't. "I'm not asking questions," I said, taking it gently. "But this better not be cookies again. You already won me over with those oatmeal ones." He chuckled. "This one's got fewer calories, more impact." Inside, I found a folded letter, neatly typed, signed by Mr. Dorsey, and half a dozen names I recognized from the senior center. People who'd come to my little fix-it workshop months ago, when I still believed giving something for free meant something. "Dear Clifton Community Grant Committee," it began, and it didn't let up. Every line spoke of how I'd shown up with a box of tools and patience, how I didn't just fix old lamps and radios. I listened, taught, encouraged. The kind of words I hadn't heard applied to me in years. I blinked. "Mr. Dorsey, did you put them up to this?" He shrugged, modest. "We talk, Miss Hollowell. Sometimes folks need a nudge to say what they already feel." The rest of the day drifted past in a blur. The wind rattled the windows. The car sat quiet out back. And that envelope stayed on the table like a promise I wasn't sure I was allowed to cash in. But that evening, I found myself standing outside the Clifton Senior Center again, this time holding a tin of cinnamon cookies I'd baked myself. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few spots taken up by rusting Buicks and boxy minivans. Inside, the linoleum floors gleamed, and the scent of weak coffee and winter coats wrapped around me like a familiar song. "Rena!" Glenda, the center's director, swept in from the hallway wearing a bright red knit scarf. She hugged me tight. "I was just telling Joe we missed our favorite fixer." "I didn't know I was a favorite," I murmured. "Everyone who left that class walked out a little taller. You made people feel seen." In the corner, a white-haired man tinkered with a toaster on a folding table, his brow furrowed. It made me smile. Glenda guided me into the office, where we shared 2 styrofoam cups of bitter coffee. I unfolded the letter again and stared at the signatures. "Dorsey says you're applying for the town grant?" she asked. "I'm thinking about it," I said. Who opens a business these days without a degree or backing?" "You've got something better," she said, tapping the letter. "Community." On my walk home, the wind picked up, and I stuffed my hands into my coat pockets. The moonlight caught on the dust still clinging to my boots. I could still feel the hug from Glenda, the squeeze in my chest when I saw my name typed at the top of that letter. My phone buzzed. "Tommy." "Hey," he said, breathless. "You won't believe this. Someone named Barbara Lund called the paper, said she read your blog, your post about fixing things with intention. She wants to meet." I stopped walking. "Who is she?" "Local foundation director, big on community-led stuff. I think she might want to sponsor something." I didn't say anything at first. I just watched a leaf skitter across the sidewalk, spinning like it had somewhere to be. "Rena?" Tommy's voice softened. "I'm here," I said. "I'm just letting it land." Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen in hand and the grant form spread out before me. The final field asked for a name. Business owner. I wrote, "Rena Hollowell, owner-operator." And I didn't flinch. "Maybe I do know what I do," I whispered. On Christmas morning, I got a card from Vanessa. No glitter, no apology, just 7 words. "Mom drove the car to church today." I sat at the kitchen table, the pale light through the curtains painting soft stripes across my teacup. Outside, snow clung lazily to the eaves, melting slower than I expected for late morning. The card sat between the sugar jar and a cracked salt shaker, plain white with slanted handwriting. 7 words. Not cold, not warm, just there. I didn't fix that Honda to win points. I did it because I could. I set the card aside, took a slow sip of peppermint tea, and looked toward the notebook that held my to-do list for January. The workshops were already penciled in. 4 sessions, all basic repair. I picked up my phone and dialed. Clifton Senior Center, Glenda answered, her voice like sunshine. Hi, Glenda. Just confirming. First class is January 5th? Yes, we're all set. I already have a waiting list, by the way. That fast? I laughed, startled. You're a hit, she said warmly. They keep asking when the girl who fixed Harold's lamp is coming back. I smiled, letting that settle in. The girl who fixed Harold's lamp, not Vanessa's sister, not useless. By noon, I bundled into my coat and stepped into the crisp air. The sky had finally broken open to blue, and the wind was playful rather than punishing. A short walk down Maple Street brought me to a narrow storefront with dusty windows and a peeling awning. The old shoe repair shop. Tommy was already there, 2 folding chairs slung over one arm and a thermos in the other. Brought the essentials, he grinned, holding up the thermos like a trophy. Please tell me that's not dinner coffee. It's worse, he said. It's my own blend, but it's hot. We stepped inside. The space still smelled like rubber soles and old glue, but underneath it was potential. Wide windows, a sturdy counter, enough wall space for pegboards and shelves. I ran my hand along the edge of the counter. It felt like a possibility. Think we could fit a tool bench back here? Tommy asked, pointing to the far corner. If we move that shelf, I said, and maybe paint over that duck mural. He laughed. Or keep it. Adds character. We were halfway through measuring the back wall when Mr. Dorsey walked by the front window, his scarf flapping in the wind. Well, I'll be, he said, stepping inside. Never thought I'd see the lights back on in this place. You and I both, I said. Want some terrible coffee? He declined with a tip of his hat, but handed me a small cloth bag. Just a little something. For your wall inside was a thank you note he'd left weeks ago. The original one from the mailbox hinge. Still folded, still humble. I'd forgotten it on my fridge, taped under a grocery list. I stared at it, then walked over to the side wall, above where the register used to be. There, I pinned it beside the official grant acceptance letter, freshly printed and signed. Words from 2 different worlds, one from a city official, one from a quiet man with a squeaky mailbox. And both meant the world to me. We stayed a while longer, rearranging, planning. Tommy talked about signage, and I jotted ideas in a spiral notebook. The wind outside jostled the door lightly, making the old chimes ring. Peppermint from my scarf mixed with the musty scent of the floorboards. And then, without fanfare, I flipped the small, open sign on the glass door. Outside, a young girl in a red coat paused on the sidewalk, holding her dad's hand. Her eyes lit up as she pointed toward the tools hanging inside. I walked to the door and pulled it open. Come in if you like, I said. We're just getting started. Sometimes the quietest gestures leave the deepest mark. I didn't fix that car for recognition. I did it because someone she loved needed to get to church without chasing a bus in the snow. Kindness, when given without expectation, has a way of echoing back in the most unexpected ways. And often, the ones called useless are simply waiting for a chance to be useful in their own quiet brilliance. So if this story settled gently in your heart, Take a look around. Someone nearby might be carrying more than they let on, and your small act could be the light they remember longest.